So I want everybody to run out and buy this book, because this book is actually, it's a real bargain. I got it for $25 on Amazon a few years back. I got more than one and I gave some out. But this is not like a child's book. This is not something simple. So the first part of the book that we've been in right now, he's been proving the difference between Jewish astrology and the astrology of idolaters. And in that, we learned a tremendous amount about idolatry, that we're recognizing what it is. And he also talked about Jewish astrology. But mostly the idea over here was using the words of Rabbi Abraham Barchia, medieval Jewish scholar, tremendous scholar, who put this work out, and he argued on it and he presented it. I just want to bring out a few little ideas that he ended off with last, because now we're going to start a different section. This is a famous Kabbalist from the early 1900s wrote in his book that the desire of the righteous people is to be directed by God. That is, to know his mitzvahs and know what to do. And also, though, we're talking about Tvekis and all of these different shiurim, that we're talking about connecting with God and really having the living God within inside of us and trying to recognize that fact and that place. So all of that is to be directed by that. And thus they become able to go beyond all the things that separate us from God because of our sins and attach themselves directly to God. This is one of the things I like about the learning of Breslov, of Rebbe Nachman, is that he thinks that even a guy like me, who's really from nowhere, can actually try to connect to God. He can learn how to do that. And he wants to teach us. So here are the other teachers. So he says, now, in conclusion, I remember my teacher, the late Rabbi, a great Zoltan Mason. He was not a rabbi, whom I learned with for a number of years, and he said, all of astrology is in the Bible. You just have to know where to look. So here we come to the next section now. The next section he entitles, look how he writes it, he says, The Basic Model of the Universe. This book is, the way that it's printed and put together, is like a workbook. So like you could take notes on it or something like that. Just a workbook. Now here we go. The Basic Model of the Universe by Yaakov Kronenberg. Here we go. This book is an edited transcription of a series of lectures on Torah astrology, detailing where astrology is incorporated in the overall system of Kabbalah. Now let's understand who Yaakov Kronenberg is. Because Yaakov Kronenberg is just a regular guy. He's going to explain himself a lot more. Yaakov Kronenberg got tremendously involved in this. And as a result, he's become like, he's the place to go. The series that details the views of our sages dating back through the millennia. Now he says these are the ideas of the Arizal, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, great scholars that lived in Kabbalists that lived in Sfat, and includes references from the Talmud and Zohar and the commentaries. The various upper worlds are discussed, including how the flow of energy, and this is our point, descends and is transmitted in the final stage through the stars and planets. It also discusses why these planetary influences can be overridden through Torah and mitzvahs. So we see here is that the opening to a tremendous amount of secrets. And now Reb Yaakov Kronenberg, not a rabbi, wants to come and teach us some Torah and tell something about himself. So this is a little bit about myself. Let me see if I get this down. It's not in the right place. There we go. I was born and raised in New York City. I went to some of the top universities in America. And after that, at the age of 21, I started to work on Wall Street. Now, this is a smart guy. There I met an old Hungarian Jewish man. His name was Zoltan Mason, who was about 70. I guess he lived through the war in Europe, and then he came to America. When I met him, he taught me a bit of astrology and a lot about mystical philosophy. He also got me interested in Judaism and Kabbalah. One day I asked him which country I should go to since I wanted to leave America. I never wanted to live in America. I was always in a rush to get out of America. He didn't want me to go because he really thought highly of me, and he wanted me to eventually take over his practice, which is what? He's an astrologer. But I wanted to leave America, so he said to me that the only place where I would make it would be in Israel. But the only problem would be that once I went to Israel, he said, I would not want to come back. And this is how it was. I left America in the summer of 1976. And today, he's writing this book like 13, 12 years ago. It's 2011. And indeed, maybe altogether, except for around 30 days of me visiting in America, I have never been back. And I'm very happy here, he says. So when I came to Israel, I started to learn rabbinics. As my astrology teacher said, I should learn to think like a rabbi. In other words, you have to learn the rabbis how they talk. So something to understand is that we're learning Kabbalah in a lot of our classes. There's a separate language in Kabbalah. So you have to know who Zeranpin is and what it means to be on the Acharayim, on the backside, what Benemius means. These are all new words that are attached to Kabbalistic ideas. So he says this is also, so they have to think like a rabbi. So I thought that since I have to think like a rabbi, the best thing for me would be learn from rabbis and become like one. So I started studying in yeshiva for students who were interested in learning Kabbalah and was trained in it, and it was a yeshiva that had just been opened at that time. Now, this is back in 1970s. There wasn't a lot going on in Israel. It was a little small place. And Jerusalem was a little place back then. That's what he said. So I was lucky enough to hang around with the most special rabbis who were experts in Kabbalah. So it was at the root, at the very beginning. I studied with Rabbi Mordechai Sharabi a little, and most of my teachers were his students. I also studied with Rabbi Gedura and Rab Darcy, who are no longer with us, and with students of Rabbi Sharabi, such as Rabbi Tzion Bracha and Meir Levi. I have also studied with some rabbis of our own generation, such as the Rabbi Mordechai Atiyah, Rabbi David Bratzri, and Rabbi Beniyahu Shmueli. I was one of the first students of his yeshiva, so this is more or less my background. So he's telling us a little bit to know. Now we'll read a little bit more. We don't have a really easy break here, but we're going to do what we have to do. I have friends, students of Mr. Mason, who started some 20 years ago an organization that called itself Project Hindsight. And its whole aim was to rediscover the astrology that had been lost. They felt that astrology had become very superstitious and become very much psychologically oriented, which is, I have a background in psychology, and I would say that fundamentally, I never really agreed with this thought, but here it comes, and we have to take it for what it is. They felt that it had become too very humanistic, which ignored the distinction between good and evil because they were value judgments, and didn't predict the future because everybody could so easily overcome their fate. This was in the 1960s and 1970s, and also in the 1980s when it became really psychologically oriented, with minimal predictions where you're heading and what would happen to you. Rather, astrology discussed in your psychological makeup. It was psychologically oriented with psychologists. So to say, he says, with psychologists who couldn't make a good living out of psychology alone, so they resorted to astrology. I don't really think that's where I'm coming from. I think the opposite of that. But on the other hand, let's see what he says. And then a reverse alternative movement started and grew up in the 1980s, and it aimed towards getting back to traditional astrology, which is based on ancient wisdom, and astrology that was more predictive and focused on trying to understand who the person is through what was going to happen to him, what his mission is in life, and what does the future hold and where he is heading. So a group of astrologers at that time, most of whom were connected to Zoltan Mason, who was kind of the godfather of that movement. He was probably the only person in America at that time who tried to teach what was called traditional astrology. Project Hindsight tried to rediscover the old books, which had been lost, and put them together and polish them. Their aim was to rediscover which methods worked in early astrology and which predictive methods worked and which didn't. And so you see how astrology evolved. They started going through the history. When you look at all their works, you see they rediscovered Greek astrology, Babylonian astrology, Roman, medieval, and Arab astrology. But what I found interesting is that you can't find any Jewish astrology at all, which they uncovered. When there is so much, one must ask them, was there ever a Jewish astrology? And if so, what was it all about? Now we're going to stop right here, and that's where we're going to be our place. So we'll start here on the next year. This is Baruch Fleischman at the Tikkun.